Judges presiding over former Gauteng Health MEC Bandile Masuku's review application against the SIU have questioned why Premier David Makhura's decision to fire Bandile Masuku is not before courts. Masuku is challenging the SIU's report into the unlawful procurement of PPE, which found him guilty of not conducting sufficient oversight. Now, the SIU is also investigating the 125 million rand tender awarded to Royal Paca, that's the company owned by Thandisizwe Digo, the presidential spokesperson Kusela Digo's husband. Now, this morning, judges sitting in the Pretoria High Court questioned why Masuku wants a review of the SIU report, but is not challenging Makhura's decision to fire him. Well, let's get an update now from our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is monitoring proceedings in Pretoria. Ziyanda, that's a very central question, because if Dr. Masuku is going to court to challenge the findings of the SIU, why in the world would he not want his old job back?
Certainly, and this is what, you know, the judges have been probing Masuku's counsel, William Makhura, to say, surely then you should also be questioning David Makhura for firing you, because he used the SIU reports as the basis of him firing Masuku from his position. And Makhura responded to say that, you know, while this may be true, their main issue is with the actual reports and its findings, because they could do reputational damage to Mr. Bandile Masuku. Another question that was posed to William Makhura was to say, well, then you're dealing with a secondary issue. Surely you should firstly be dealing with Makhura, and this is more of a collateral issue. And if it's a collateral issue, why should a full bench of judges be listening to this issue? Because if you're talking about reputational damage, then you're in essence referring to defamation. And if that's defamation, then you should rather be suing the SIU and not bringing their review of their report to the courts. Now, how Masuku's counsel has responded to this is to say that you know, it's not just about a reputational damage, but also the SIU is a creature of statutes, and they're arguing that the SIU acted beyond what is prescribed in the act that oversees and governs the creation of the special investigating units. And the judges so far are still trying to get an answer as to why this is the case, because they are of the view then, Koli, that this matter is ultimately a civil one, and Judge Raulinga was even raising you know, the question of whether or not if you know, this report in and of itself, if the findings are going to affect Masuku, if he shouldn't then be addressing it elsewhere, and ultimately then this has got nothing to do with their particular jurisdiction.
Yeah. Tell us exactly what Bandile Masuku's argument is in court if he accuses the SIU of going beyond the scope of their mandate.
Well, in essence, he's saying that one, the report is baseless. There's not enough evidence to prove that Masuku failed to conduct the necessary oversight. And you remember that as SIU, Koli, didn't make a conclusive finding on the issue of whether or not Masuku acted in a corrupt manner. And this is very crucial, because all they did was to find him of not acting in line with the Public Finance Management Act. But in terms of the corruption aspect, which of course has political implications, that's not what they found. And this again then is something that's raised in the answering affidavit of the investigator of the SIU, who's responded to say that it seems as though Masuku is playing a political ping pong. And there's actually a bite that I want us to play, Koli, which is dealing then with this particular issue of the SIU's mandate, whether or not they acted according to it, but also whether or not this matter should be before the courts.
If you can demonstrate that when that organ of state did so was exercising a public power, you can come to court, and the court exercises what you call judicial scrutiny. So we're challenging the findings as a primary challenge, not collateral, because the findings, they stand as an albatross on his neck for the rest of his life. And if he does not set them aside, it means that he does not have any recourse anyway. And the Constitution says that he does have a recourse, and that recourse is with the courts. So then now to come to the question posed by Justice Raulinga, that the SIU, that the Premier then may decide not to accept the findings. That is not the issue. The issue is the findings that are made by the SIU. They are findings not made by the Premier. It doesn't matter whether the Premier accepts them or not. They remain findings. They do not get erased because the Premier has refused to implement them. They will remain the findings against the applicant, and if the applicant does not do anything with them, they will continue to impugn his dignity and reputation. And that's precisely what the courts have said with the Commission of Inquiry.
I think the most compelling point out of that statement made by Advocate Mkhari is that if these findings are allowed to stand, they remain an albatross around Bandile Masuku's neck for the rest of his life. And it would seem to me that that is at the core of his argument in court, that this is a finding that has tainted my image and possibly professional life. In fact, probably he's fighting more than anything to restore his dignity, but at most, or importantly, the reputation that has to do with his professional career as a medical doctor.
Certainly. And of course, then we go back to that particular space, Xoli, of whether or not then Masuku shouldn't be suing the SIU as opposed to bringing the report before review. And the discussion even got to a point where one of the judges, and it was Judge Roland Sutherland, who was saying, well, from the description that you've given us, Counsel Mkhari, it seems as though the SIU may be akin to the work of a policeman. Please explain then the role of the SIU, because if you're saying the SIU is is a creature of statute rather, then that would obviously, can you explain how this is so? Mkhari responded to say, no, I actually would disagree with saying that the SIU is akin to the work of a policeman. I would actually say that the SIU is akin to the public protector, but the only fundamental difference is that the public protector can issue remedial action. The SIU can only issue recommendations. But furthermore, the other argument that they've made is that the judges have made is that, well, Makhura would have also had the option to reject the findings of the reports, and he has that sort of prerogative, and he could have kept Masuku in his executive. And so these are the issues that have been meted out, because then the description of the role of the SIU will guide then whether or not this is not simply a defamation case, or whether the contents of the report and how the SIU does its work becomes then an issue that would affect not just the case of Bandile Masuku, but the work that the SIU has been mandated to do in relation to relief funds for the coronavirus pandemic.
If we digress a little bit, Ziyanda, and assume for a second that the charge or the finding of the SIU against Masuku, and that is that of the failure to exercise oversight within his department, in essence allowing for corruption to take hold, that might have an implication for the exact same charge, because it is the exact same charge that the ANC Secretary General, Ace Magashule, is facing in the Free State when he was Premier, the failure to exercise oversight. Might this have implications, whatever the court outcome is, in particular around this issue of the failure to exercise oversight?
So I think I'd start off by saying I think the issue that we continuously find in both matters is the evidence of how the particular individual has failed to conduct oversight. I'll give you an example. With Bandile Masuku, there's an argument now over an email. There's a particular email that there's an argument about that apparently Bandile Masuku, not apparently, he was sent an email by former CFO Kabelo Luhlwenya indicating the list of suppliers, which then of course would have had Royal Baka, which is owned by Thandisizwe Diko. But also there's an argument that he was told by officials that there were red flags that were raised with Masuku. Now, Masuku was arguing that he never opened that email and thus he made him unaware of who the suppliers for PPE would have been. And so, again, even when you look at the issue of Ace Magashule in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court, it's the exact same thing, that where is the evidence to prove that I failed to conduct oversight? Because critically, it's not, you're still not saying that the person has acted in a corrupt manner. You still haven't proven that they've influenced, because this is about influence and the perception that you used your position of power to influence who the tender was awarded to, which is not this is not what the SIU is saying. And so it will also have political implications, Xoli, you know, either way, regardless of what the court outcome is.
And what do we know of Bandile Masuku's ambitions to remain in politics? I mean, I made the point earlier that this is someone who was a star for a short moment.
Yeah.
But that has gone from hero to zero in a very, very quick turnaround. And the allegations of corruption are very, very damaging. Is he still keen? Do we know whether he's still keen to continue a career in politics?
Well, at this stage, it seems like he is, but I mean, he is still, of course, a member of the legislature.
He's
still
young.
And he's young, and he's still a member of the ANC in Gauteng, the PEC. And I believe that whatever, this is exactly why he's taken it to court, because if the court sets aside the findings of the SIU, I'd like to believe that he'd take whatever comes out of that back to the Gauteng ANC to have it reviewed. We know there's a new health MEC, yeah. But I think then it would push Makhura in one way or another.
I suspect we might see Bandile Masuku coming back vociferously here, should he win this case, and in particular, coming back for his old job. Because what justification would there be to let him go if he is found to have been innocent of these findings by the SIU? But that's just speculation for the moment. Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much for the time, being our senior